Communications 431 group project, and we were all very passionate about learning more about the Kinder Morgan pipeline. And once you do, it's really opening Pandora's box. There's a lot to know, and the biggest thing we realized is that it's really important to be informed about this pipeline. So we were very grateful. We have some guest speakers today, and Kevin's going to take it away to explain a little bit more, but thank you for coming.
Hey guys, my name is Kevin. With the proposed Kinder Morgan pipeline, Tsleil-Waututh Nation lately decided to oppose it based on environmental factors as one of the key elements. And with that, we developed our sacred trust team. And so this is why we brought in Cedar and Ben. Okay. And so, what else can we so for the next hour and a bit, Ben and Cedar will be talking about the Kinder Morgan pipeline and how we have not been properly researched.
And if you have questions about anything, I think we're going to have a time at the end for questions, so if you want to save those for the end. And we'll just open it up at that point for discussion, which we think is really important. So Ben and Cedar will give you the floor.
Alright, it's good to see some smiles. We've got a good crowd, I like that. Good students. How's everybody doing? Can everybody hear me pretty well? Do I gotta speak up? Use my speaking voice. Is that good? That's better? Yeah? Alright. Well, welcome to Tsleil-Waututh ancestral land, and I will share with Squamish and Musqueam. So I'd like to welcome you guys here from our club to introduce my name in my native tongue. Tsleil-Waututh, Tsleil-Waututh. My name is Cedar George-Parker from Tsleil-Waututh Nation, straight out of Vancouver, and Tsleil Tribe, which is straight out of Seattle. So you can say I'm a West Coast baby. I love it here. The West Coast is the best coast. And, you know, I think it's the most beautiful, so I guess that's kind of how I got into this type of work, you know what I mean? I want to keep it nice. I want to keep it beautiful. I want to keep my family here safe. I want to keep everything that I love safe. You know, and when I talk about love, I talk about, like, my friends, my family, you know what I mean? Who I am as a person is my friends and family that made me the person who I am. So how did I start getting into this type of work? Well, first off, I started questioning my government and the society that I live in. But how did I get to that? In 10/24/2014, when I was in high school, I was 17 years old. I was in a mass shooting at my high school, Marysville Project High School, which is in the Seattle area. I was in a mass shooting. 3 of my cousins died, and 2 of my friends died. My other cousin, he lived on the way, and the bullet went right through his jaw, so he's still alive, thank God. So after that, you know, I went through that, and I remember I was there, and everybody was running. Like, imagine that happened well, you guys are in school right now, so, like, I was just in school. It was just like a normal day. I walked in, and then I was driving out, and then, like, I heard some gunshots. I'm like, oh, shit, what the hell was that? I thought they were fireworks, right? It was just normal to call it fireworks. Oh, it's just someone, you know what I mean? Then I hear, like, sirens, and I'm like, oh, what the hell, sirens? But honestly, I thought it was terrorists at first. I'm like, what? And then, like, I saw probably, like, 50 to 100 of my friends running, and, like, it looked like a movie, right? Like, they're all scared and stuff, and, like, I'll never forget, like, nobody could really talk, because, you know, I was the oldest kid. I was 17, and, like, they were 14 and, like, 15, 16. And like, the school shut up. I'm like, who did it? They're like, jailing. I'm like, oh, fuck. Really? So I got my friends and I drove off. And then the next couple of weeks I started, like, I don't want to say I was going crazy, but when someone dies and, like, you don't know why, you start questioning yourself about your humanity. You start asking yourself about your society and the government in which you live in, you know, because America and Canada are G20 countries, which means they're the richest countries in the world, but yet we have kids in our own city starving, you know what I mean? That's kind of crazy, right? The top 20 most, you know, richest countries in the world are starving, you know, kids are killing each other. That's crazy. And, like, so I started questioning my society and questioning everything where I live in, you know what I mean? Like, why is there no social uplifts to come help us? Because, like, no counselors came to my school to help, you know, we're just a bunch of kids roaming free with trauma, you know, PTSD. So then I started questioning myself, like, what the heck was going on? So then questioned myself about my humanity, and I said, I want to make this world a better place because of the things that I went through, and the things that I went through made me who I am today. So after that, I started, questioning everything. I was going a little bit crazy. I ain't gonna lie, PTSD, right? And, imagine seeing like brains on the floor, at 17, and like everybody running. So I started going crazy, you know what I mean? Started doing things that weren't good for me. I dropped out. So then after that, I went to a trip on the Alberta tar sands. Does anybody know what that is? The Alberta tar sands?
Yeah.
Alright, so here's some statistics. So in the Alberta tar sands, it's the biggest industrial project in the world. They want to move the size of France. Whoever doesn't know how big France is, it's big as Texas. So they want to move that much earth just for oil. And when they extract that oil, it's even bad. It takes 2 tons of earth and then 2 barrels of water to get 1 barrel of oil. That's ridiculous. That's crazy. And then, so I went up there to travel, and in that place is one of the highest concentrations of per capita, like for people who have cancer, like one of the highest concentration of cancer, people with cancer. And so I went there and interviewed this lady. I went there for documentary. I interviewed this lady, and she said, I have asthma. She started talking about her family, and I hope everybody in here loves the family. And then she started talking about her daughter. She has cancer. Oh, my daughter has cancer. I'm like, and there's an elder, right? And then she's like, and my grandchildren have asthma already. We're not allowed to bathe the children in the water there. You can't take showers. You take showers with bottled water. And then she started crying. And then when you see someone's tears, it does something to you, right? It makes you kind of want to do something. She said, I need help. Our people need help. And then that right, and in that moment when I saw her tears, her grandmother's tears for her grandchildren and her daughter, that's the moment when I said, I want to stop this. I said, that's the moment I questioned my humanity and said, am I going to let this happen? And I said, hell no. I said, hell no. So that's how I got into this, because of that grandmother, because I want to do something, because of the things that happened in my life to make me who I am today, which, are my friends that are dead, and I thought about all the social uplifts that could have happened at oil because $775 billion to $1 trillion a year from government subsidies go to oil companies. And that got me thinking, imagine all the social uplifts that we could have for children who are starving, for children who are killing each other, not even for just children, for adults, you know what I mean? For the people, and that's crazy. $1 trillion is a lot of money. That's how much goes to fossil fuel companies every year, you know what I mean? From world governments. So then I started questioning myself, imagine what could happen with all that money, and I said, man, I'm going to do something about it, because for one, I asked myself, what do I love? Who do I love? I love my family, I love my land, and I love the West Coast, and it's said in the music, the West Coast is the best coast. It's said in the music, and I want to keep it that way. There's a reason why they call it beautiful British Columbia, right? So those are the things that I love, and those are the people that I love, and then I said, what's going to affect that? How is oil going to affect that? And I said, well, I'm not going to let my brother get cancer while I'm alive. I'm not going to let my little nephew, who was actually born yesterday, who was born today, actually, who was born today, I couldn't go, I came here. And I said, I'm not going to let him have cancer. I'm not going to let him bathe in bottles of speech in this government. Activists around the world, that's where I've traveled, they go missing, right? They go missing. Like the students in Mexico, just like you guys, students. And activists, they go missing, which, my friends say they know what missing means, they end up dead. And so I said, well, I have freedom of speech in Canada, I have freedom of speech in the United States. I'm going to use my voice and ain't nobody going to stop me. So that's how I got into this. So I said, no means no, and enough is enough. No kids should have to grow up bathing themselves in water. That doesn't make sense to me, No kids should... I questioned, am I going to let these terrible things happen? And I questioned my humanity, and I said, no. So I stood up to the bullies, and I said, no, So I'm keep on fighting.
Wow, Cedar, you're a tough act to follow. So, hi everybody, my name's Ben West. You'll have to forgive me, I'm fighting off being sick. This is actually one of the first days I've been out of bed for like 5 days. I couldn't be any more thrilled to be with you guys here today at CAP. A little bit about myself. I spent 3 years of my life as the chair of the Capilano Student Union, and I was a student rep on the Board of Governors here for 4 years. from 2000 to 2004. And I was a mature student, so it tells you how old I am. I couldn't be much more thrilled to be here with you guys today. For one thing, even just in this beautiful room. This is a space that didn't exist in this building when I was a student here, and it's just such a great thing to have a space like this that we can gather and talk about important issues. I want to share my thanks to Cedar and to the Tsleil-Waututh Nation for the greeting here today. It was always a real privilege for me in years gone by when I was a student here to have opportunities to learn from the local community who'd been here since time immemorial, and it's one of the biggest blessings of my life that I now am working for Tsleil-Waututh Nation Communications work. I've been involved in this campaign around Kinder Morgan now for over 10 years. Actually, first got involved when I worked at a place called the West and Cedar Wilderness Committee. And before that, I worked on the campaign around the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline. So working on these issues has definitely been a big part of my life, and in fact even was doing similar work here at Capilano before that. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through some of the kind of key things about this project. Feel free to interrupt me at any time if you've got questions. Also, this might be stuff that a lot of you are already familiar with, so I could go as fast or as slow as you want. And we're going to try to leave a fair amount of time at the end for question and discussion, because I'm sure there's a lot to talk about. But just for starters, this is probably the best place to start is just taking a look at this mock-up of the new Kinder Morgan terminal, and definitely tells you a lot about why the Tsleil-Waututh people in particular are concerned about this project, but I'd say really why everybody should be concerned about this project, because what you see there is this new expanded berth for increased tanker traffic. And I think Cedar already told you this, but there's, the proposal would basically bring, an increase from about 30 to 60 tankers a year to over 400 tankers a year. And each one of these vessels, like the one that's actually sitting out there on the water right now, I saw it on the way over here, carries something like 600,000 barrels of diluted bitumen. We'll talk a little bit more about the difference between diluted bitumen and conventional crude oil. But even if it was just crude oil, it'd be scary enough. To put that in perspective, does anybody know how much oil was spilled by the Exxon Valdez? It's all right if you don't. I'm just trying to be engaging. It's about 100,000 barrels. So one of the kind of worst disasters in the history of the coast that we're all familiar with was sizable spill. Each one of these tankers is carrying 6 times as much as one of those as was spilled by the Exxon Valdez. So each one of those vessels is a potential Exxon Valdez disaster right in Burrard Inlet. It's important, I think, to focus on the tanker piece of this because, often we hear this described as a twinning. Simply the idea that there's an existing pipeline, there'll be a new pipeline. People say, well, it's an existing right-of-way, there's already existing traffic. Like, wouldn't it be better to do this here than somewhere else? It's going to happen somewhere. We can talk a bit more about whether it really does need to happen somewhere. But I think it's important to remember that, this isn't a sacrifice zone. This isn't just an area that's ready to be turned into a disaster. In fact, it's an area that's teeming with life and with history, and that history is still alive in this place. Just starting with those tankers is important, and it's not just a twinning. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the oil, that goes through that pipeline already. I don't know if I just lost this entirely. I just need to actually use it. Use it or lose it. I could just talk without it.
I think it's just waking back up.
Is it waking back up? All right, I'll just keep talking, and I'll just point over here as if there's something. Where was I? It's not just a
fake it till you make it. Is where you're at.
Right. Thank you. So the project is actually far from just a twin. This company, Kinder Morgan, here's another pop quiz. Anybody know the original name of the company, Kinder Morgan? Anybody? Anyone? It's okay. You're on the right track, but that's actually a useful. So the company likes to use the name Trans Mountain Pipeline, but actually Trans Mountain Pipeline is the name of the pipeline that was built in the 50s by a conglomerate of corporations working on behalf of the federal government, explicitly for the purpose of bringing conventional crude from Alberta to the coast to be consumed here in British Columbia. The company Kinder Morgan, thank you, actually started out as a company called Enron Liquid Pipelines LLP. Kinder Morgan is actually two former Enron executives, Richard Kinder and Bill Morgan. And Richard Kinder was once called by the Wall Street Journal the luckiest ex-Enron employee, because he was next in line to be the CEO, and I'll skip the salacious details of the affair that he had with the current CEO's wife. But long story short is that he left, didn't become the CEO. The guy who did become the CEO, Jeffrey Skilling, ended up spending 13 years in prison. I'm not saying that he would have ended up in prison. It's possible he would have taken the company in another direction. But it just gives you an interesting sort of background on who this company is that eventually bought that pipeline, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which was actually built for Canada by Canadian companies working on behalf of the Canadian government. And the intent of that project was, again, for domestic consumption. The intent of this new project that they want to build is explicitly for the sake of export and explicitly for the sake of export raw material, not a processed kind of fuel. So all that risk is really for the sake of this company and their profits, a Houston-based company, not for domestic consumption. So if anybody tells you that this would reduce the price of oil locally, or that this is really about Canada and the Canadian economy, the reality is, yes, there would be jobs created in Alberta, but that's a small pittance compared to the risk that we're taking here. And truth be told, there's all kinds of other factors driving whether we need oil or not in the world, and I'll get to that at the end of the presentation. I'm going to get to these slides. We're actually going to run out of that 70 minutes because I got a lot of slides. Thanks, Ken. So I just wanted to start with this, just because I think it brings home what we're actually talking about here. What you're looking at there is bitumen. It was not even really considered viable as a fuel product until the price of oil got pretty high, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But it's important to recognize how unconventional this fuel type is. This is basically a mix of sand, clay, and oil, and it's very rich in carbon but doesn't have a lot of hydrogen in it. So actually, to make a viable hydrocarbon out of it, it needs to go through a variety of different steps that most oil would not go through. First of all, you need to dig it up from these massive pits. And in fact, we're even running out of the stuff that you can mine in pits. But just to give you a sense of how big these pits are, that's one of those trucks you're looking at. They're about 30 feet tall. And then there they are in context, right? So, I mean, these are massive holes in the earth. In fact, the size of just the open pit mines are about equivalent in size to the state of Florida. You're talking about a massive amount of land that's been moved. As Cedar was telling you, like, for every bit of that stuff that has to be moved, there's a tremendous amount of energy, a tremendous amount of water that's used just to get that stuff out of the ground that looks like peanut butter, right? Then if you actually want to turn it into oil, what you have to do is you have to separate out the sand and clay, which takes a whole bunch of energy and a whole bunch of water as well. And then if you want to turn it into a hydrocarbon, you actually have to inject natural gas or remove, with a chemical process, a portion of the carbon so that you have the right proportion of hydrogen and carbon, because it's just not a particularly good oil fuel product to begin with. So a lot of different steps just to get it to the point where you can then push it through a pipe in what's considered a raw form without actually refining it and turning it into like gasoline or jet fuel or diesel or any of the end-use products. For a lot of people, it's actually similar to the discussion of raw logs. This idea of how Canada basically just exports raw resources that are then turned into something somewhere else and then we buy them back. About 20 tankers a year currently are going through Burrard Inlet, just taking tankers down to Washington State, refining bitumen, turning it into gasoline, and bringing it back up here for us to consume in British Columbia. Only about a third of the oil that we consume in BC is actually refined at the Chevron refinery, the one that's just across the water there on Burrard Inlet. The other 2/3 are refined either in Washington State or California. This just gives you a sense of the oil sands, just giving you a picture of kind of like what this has looked like historically. This is going back to 1984. That is a satellite map. Just give you a sense of context. That's Fort McMurray down there. And then, oops, I just put the 2 in. Usually I have like 4 of those. I skipped to the point for you. But really what's significant about that date is that's basically when the price of oil went up around $100 a barrel. For extraction of oil to be cost effective from this area currently needs to be around $70 a barrel, $80 a barrel, just because there's so much work that needs to be done to get that oil out of the ground. But to actually make a buck off of it, the price has to be relatively high. And at the time, that price was even higher because they weren't doing that much of it. So it wasn't really until around 2010, 2011 when the price hit, somewhere in that $100 a barrel range, that it really started to make sense economically for companies to start extracting that oil. And of course, really the only reason that this is even happening is because we're running out of conventional crude oil that's easy to find, easily accessible in other places in the world. You guys all still with me? Yeah? All right. So one of the key things you need to know about oil in Alberta is the human health impacts. In Fort McMurray and the surrounding area, there's been about 3 times the normal level of rare forms of cancer, basically around the areas where these facilities are. That number has actually been estimated even higher by some, but I'm giving you the Alberta Health Department's own statistics, just so there's no debate about whether that's actually the real numbers or not. There's actually a doctor who did studies that showed much higher numbers. But I think this is really important to remember, and that ties into the stuff that you were hearing from Cedar. One chief from the area, from the Fort Chipewyan First Nation, do you remember when ducks kept landing in these tailing ponds and dying? Yeah. So this chief said, do I need to walk 100 of my community members into one of these tailing ponds before anybody actually pays attention to what's happening in this community? Which really, that affected me, just seeing that in the context of what was going on. And, we were paying a lot of attention to these ducks, but we weren't paying a lot of attention to, the people's health that was being affected, particularly Indigenous people who are living close to these facilities. So now I'm going to take you on a little trip down the pipeline from the tar sands to, here in the lower mainland area. What you're looking at is the map that's actually provided by Kinder Morgan on their website. It looks kind of innocuous enough. You basically see an existing pipeline and then a new pipeline running along next to it. The reality is that actually much of the pipeline doesn't run directly along the existing route. You're talking about a pipeline that is actually built through the most densely populated parts of the province. Basically the province of British Columbia was built over where that existing pipeline was in the time since the 1950s. And it just happens that some of the cheapest property was right along the existing pipeline route because it's cheaper to buy property on a place with a pipeline, it turns out. Because who the hell wants to buy property on top of a pipeline, I guess? It turns out, unfortunately, a lot of schools, a lot of hospitals, a lot of places that you wouldn't want a new pipeline to go through. So there's big chunks of this pipeline, which I don't have the detailed versions of the maps, but if you go to twnSacredTrust.ca, you can find a whole bunch of maps that were actually made by the group, the Wilderness Committee that I used to work for. They've got a professional mapper who's gone through in detail and sort of illustrated exactly where the pipeline goes. And even right now, because basically the company's proposal shows a large right-of-way, basically within kilometers, and right now what's happening in the sort of post-approval phase is that they have to take the specific areas that they want to take this pipeline through and then try to negotiate that at the municipal level. And that's one of the biggest roadblocks they've actually got right now. For example, in the Sumas Mountain area, the pipeline runs either through an aquifer or through 60 people's backyard. And there's a question does it go through the aquifer or does it go through the backyards, right? You'll be happy to know, though, that they have rerouted it around the Nestle bottled water facility, so that'll be fun. You'll get to some juicy information about that in a second. But there's actually one other thing that I think is pretty significant that's missing from this map that I just wanted to point out. Does anybody see anything significant missing from this? It's kind of a trick question because it's a big something. It's the entire Fraser River watershed. The river itself, all the tributaries, all the surrounding elements of the ecosystem are in no way represented on the map that was shared. And it's worth pointing out, you can't really see it on this, but basically the Fraser River itself, this pipeline runs right along next to it for about half of the route of the pipeline. So if you're worried about salmon in the most important salmon-bearing river in the world, if you're worried about all the related ecosystem services that we all depend on for life, here we are in a province that's sometimes called Salmonopolis because basically the protein from that salmon is what made the rainforest possible in this province. all of that really is in danger because of the pipeline. And the pipeline directly crosses the Fraser twice. Once up by the headwaters close to Mount Robson National Park, and another time in the Surrey-Langley area. So one of the most common questions is how likely is an oil spill? I'm not going to walk you through a bunch of stuff that's taken directly from the TWN. God bless you. Not at all. I'm going to walk you through a bunch of stuff that's taken directly from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation's assessment report. If you don't know, the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, in their opposition to the project, did a more fulsome assessment of the proposal than the federal government did. And I can tell you that because I've read both assessments in detail. The Tsleil-Waututh Nation's report is over 1,200 pages with a variety of appendixes and a whole bunch of expert studies that were not even considered by the National Energy Board or taken into consideration when consultation was done, even though there was updated versions of reports hand delivered to ministers and ministers' aides. We could talk more about why that happened, but long story short is there was a tremendous amount of information and very good research that was done and peer-reviewed and was not fully taken into consideration. I'll walk you through a little bit of it. I show you this map just to give you a sense of how likely oil spills are before I give you the stuff directly from the assessment report. What you're seeing is from 2002 to 2011, all the major oil pipelines in the United States. The bigger those circles are, the bigger the oil spill. The smaller the circles are, the smaller the oil spill. Long story short is, can you see a single pipeline that doesn't have circles on it? They all are covered in these things, and some of them have a lot of it. The point is that oil spills are part of the business. It just happens on a regular basis. In fact, the industry even has a name for it. It's called normal spillage. They account for it in their accounting. They have estimates of how much oil they'll lose over time. Some of that is even just from filling tankers. Like, you know that you're going to lose a tiny bit of oil every time you do that, and you can account for it. They have accounting principles that are widely accepted for understanding this. So I think it's important if somebody's trying to convince you that this stuff is safe, there'll never be a spill. The reality is that nobody can guarantee there'll never be a spill. In fact, in the history of the Kinder Morgan pipeline, or I should say the Trans Mountain pipeline before Kinder Morgan bought it in 2008, that pipeline has never gone more than 4 years without some sort of a release, as the industry calls it. Yeah?
Correct me if I'm wrong,